on your team is pushing limits, it's because they've already found yours. Now let that sit for a moment because the truth is difficult behavior doesn't start with defiance. It actually starts with curiosity. So people test, they probe, they watch how leaders respond when something actually starts to feel off. And when there's no response, that silence answers the question for them. So I'm Brenda Neckvatal, and I help the strongest leaders deal with the messiest people. And if you've ever thought that this person wasn't always like this, you're right. Because difficult people aren't born in a vacuum. They're actually created in environments where hesitation quietly replaces leadership. So here's the part that most leaders don't want to hear, but they need to. You don't wake up one morning with a toxic employee. You wake up one morning realizing the behavior has outpaced your response. And by then, you're no longer managing behavior, you're actually now managing the fallout. So let's slow this down for a second. Most leaders think problems show up loudly, explosive, obvious, impossible to ignore. And that's not how this works. And the real danger shows up very polite, it shows up reasonable, it shows up just subtle enough to make you question yourself. So then you tell yourself, well, they're just stressed. They're really good at their job. I don't want to make a big deal out of this. So you wait. And that waiting is not neutral because waiting actually teaches people what they can get away with. So let me paint the picture for you. It starts with friction, but you can feel, but you can't quite name. Okay. The tone shifts. They stop offering ideas and start poking holes into things. They comply, but they do it without ownership. Then they ask questions that sound curious, but they actually land like challenges. And nothing that you can write up. There's like nothing you can clearly point to. And certainly nothing that HR would be even willing to touch yet. So you keep moving. Meanwhile, they're watching. Not to see if you're kind, not to see if you're fair. They're watching to see what and where your lines are. And when there's no line, they draw one on you. And this is where leaders get stuck because on the surface, it still looks like it's very manageable, but underneath, something else is forming. It could be resentment, it could be entitlement, right? It could be this quiet belief that rules are flexible when you're valuable enough. And that's where the shift starts to happen. They stop seeing expectations as standards and they start seeing them as suggestions. Now, come back to the pushback. Okay. Meetings, they start to become debates all of a sudden, and feedback actually turns into real defensiveness. Every correction comes with a justification. When all this starts happening, now you start dreading the conversations that you used to handle very easily. You rehearse in your head, you delay them, you soften your language in an attempt to be liked. And without realizing it, you begin managing their emotions instead of their performance. And that, my friends, is not leadership. That's containment. So here's the real, true, hard, ugly truth. When leaders, when they start to hesitate, certain people actually don't calm down. They get bolder, real bold. And this behavior spreads outward. Your teammates are going to notice it. They're going to start asking very quiet questions. They start mirroring what's tolerated. And now it's no longer about just one person. It's now about credibility because leadership isn't proven by what you say. It's proven by what you correct. And this is the moment most leaders miss. They think that the problem is the behavior that they're seeing now. It's not. The real problem is that the earlier signals went unanswered long enough for confidence in the system to begin to erode. So once somebody believes that, hey, this place doesn't enforce standards, you're no longer dealing with a difficult employee. You're dealing with somebody who now starts to associate and feels that they are completely untouchable. That's right there is the risk multiplier. That's when the risk multiplies. Corners start getting cut, rules get bent, and information that starts to get withheld. Stories suddenly start changing. And not because they woke up being a malicious human being, not at all, because the environment taught them that accountability was optional and not a requirement. So now the leaders who are facing this, they start to panic internally. Now what they want to do is like act fast. They need to get in there and fix the problem, right? Now they want HR. Now they want the policies. But the moment for quiet correction has long since passed. And what could have been a conversation has now become a confrontation. So what could have been redirected now has to be contained. And this is where leaders feel very blindsided. I'm sorry, my dear, you weren't blindsided. You were slowly conditioned. Conditioned to tolerate, conditioned to excuse, conditioned to wait. And unfortunately, that cost shows up everywhere. So high performers, they start to disengage. Trust begins to fracture. And your time disappears into nothing more but damage control. So the part that most people aren't going to talk about is that this just doesn't drain an organization. It sucks the life right out of the leaders. It drains the leaders. You begin to start to question your own instincts. You replay those conversations over and over and over again, and you wonder what you could have said differently. All of a sudden, inside, you start to feel isolated because you can't talk about it publicly. You feel really convicted and very responsible because deep down you know this didn't happen overnight, even though that may not necessarily be the language that's up in your head. That's the weight that leaders will carry silently when they hesitate. So here's what separates strong leaders from exhausted ones. Strong leaders don't wait for clarity to act. They use behavior as information. Every tone shift is data. Every delay is data. And every pattern is a message. And it's coming to you in real time. And the difference is knowing how to read it and knowing what to say before it escalates. Guessing is dangerous. It is a gamble, although sometimes it can pay off. But most of the time, guessing makes you very inconsistent. Inconsistency makes you extremely predictable. And predictability is what makes you weak in the eyes of somebody already testing the limits. So this is why so many leaders who are facing this stuff unintentionally lose control without actually ever raising their voice. They speak, they explain, and they hope. But I hate to tell you, hope is not a strategy. Precision is a strategy. You don't need to be harsh. You don't need to be confrontational. You just need to be clear. Be clear early. Be clear consistently. And be clear without emotion doing the driving. That's a hard one, but that's where most leaders actually struggle. They know that something's off. They just don't know how to address it without making it worse. So they say nothing. And unfortunately, nothing is what is the thing that costs more later. And this is exactly why I built my app. Not to teach theory, not to diagnose personalities, not to turn you into a therapist, but for real moments, for those real tense moments, for real tension and real conversations that leaders hesitate to have because the risk and the stakes feel way too high. But inside the app, leaders get guidance when conversations feel charged, behavior feels off, but it's kind of hard to name, and authority begins to feel challenged. Trust starts thinning before anyone says it out loud. It helps you slow the moment down, and it allows you to think clearly and allows you to respond intentionally instead of emotionally. Because confidence doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing exactly what to say next, and confidence is in the doing. So just because you may not know and then suddenly you do know, your confidence builds only when you execute. And if you're dealing with resistance, defensiveness, avoidance, or even subtle defiance, don't wait for it to turn loud. Because by the time it does, the damage is already done and it's happened behind closed doors. You don't need to figure this out alone. I promise you, you don't. You don't need to guess your way through high stake conversations. Let's have a real conversation, what it's like for leaders dealing with difficult people. And the app was built exactly for that reality. Now, you're going to find the link below because strong leadership isn't about being patient forever. It's about acting before patient turns into permission.